can I welcome you all to our event, and I particularly want to extend a very warm welcome to Patrick, Israel, Tiwa, and Damien, who have kindly agreed to speak at our event today. Colleagues, we felt it was important for us to organise this event after witnessing the distressing scenes unfolding before our eyes of the humanitarian and refugee crisis in Afghanistan. And our hearts go out to the people who are clearly in a desperate situation, particularly the women and girls whose human and civil rights are under threat. And as a trade union, we are united in our determination to do whatever we can to ensure our politicians do everything they can to provide help and support to those individuals and families who come here seeking sanctuary. And while our politicians have stated that they have asked their officials to work urgently with all relevant agencies to expedite resettlement here by putting in place the necessary measures to ensure any Afghan refugee have appropriate access to vital services such as housing, healthcare, benefits, education, and employment opportunities, it's unclear what exactly the response to date has been and what has been put in place. So today is an opportunity to hear more about the crisis in Afghanistan and the situation in other countries where people are fleeing from conflict and persecution on humanitarian grounds. We will also hear about what is working and what is not in terms of the government's response to the crisis, and what support is available in Northern Ireland, and also hear personal accounts from a refugee and an asylum seeker. So I'd like now to hand over to the chairperson of NIPSA Youth Committee, Adam Murray. Over to you, Adam.
Thanks, Geraldine, and thanks again, everyone, for attending today's event. As Geraldine said, the NIPSA Youth Committee felt very strongly that we wanted to organise an event on this topic. We organise a number of events throughout the year on different topics, and when we saw, as Geraldine says, the situation unfolding in Afghanistan, our committee members felt very strongly this should be the focus of our next event. But I suppose it's always worth reminding ourselves you don't have to look as far as Afghanistan to see the plight of asylum seekers and refugees. Very close to home here, we have had successive reports from the PSNI that racist and xenophobic hate crime has outpaced sectarian hate crime in our society, and that's something which is sadly only continuing to grow. We saw at the very beginning of this year a horrific xenophobic arson attack on the Belfast Multicultural Centre here, and we see such events becoming widespread and common across much of Europe and elsewhere. So we organized this event. As Geraldine says, we have a raft of fantastic speakers for you tonight. We hope that you'll go away with something to think about, some more information that perhaps you didn't have before, and there will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end. And as Geraldine says, this is being recorded so that other people who can't be here today can get the benefit of it. So further, nothing more for me to say other than to welcome our first speaker today, which is Patrick Corrigan. Patrick is Northern Ireland Programme Director and Head of Nations and Regions at Amnesty International UK, where he helps lead a range of human rights campaigns. Patrick was a co-founder of the successful Love Equality campaign for marriage equality. He is director of the Human Rights Consortium and has campaigned for justice for survivors of institutional child abuse, mother and baby homes, and victims of the conflict. And Patrick is going to speak to us first about the situation unfolding in Afghanistan, and then more broadly about policy, where things are going right and where they're going wrong. So Patrick, you're very welcome. Thanks very much. Just hand it over to yourself.
Thanks so much, Adam and Geraldine. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity from NIPSA to speak about this issue at this time. It is indeed very timely, and I think maybe what I'm hoping to do is sort of move from the global context and sort of increasingly down then maybe into the more local. And I know we're going to hear from a couple of others as well. I'm looking forward to that conversation stage of the event too. So Yeah, I want to start with first principles about why people leave home and go elsewhere. And I suppose there are many reasons why people around the world seek to rebuild their lives in a different country. Some people simply leave home to get a job or an education, and nothing wrong with that. That's good. Others are forced to flee persecution or human rights violations, such as torture. And millions of people flee from armed conflicts or other crises or violence. And some people no longer feel safe and might have been targeted just because of who they are or what they do or what they believe in, for example, maybe for their ethnicity, because of their religion, their sexuality, their political opinions, maybe because they are a human rights defender, perhaps a trade union activist. And these journeys, which all start with the hope for a better future, we know can also be full of danger, uncertainty, fear. Some people risk falling prey to human trafficking and other forms of exploitation. Some are detained by the authorities as soon as they arrive in a new country and spend years then behind walls. Once they're settling in and start building a new life, if they're lucky to get that far, many still, as Adam's already touched on in this sort of local context, many people still then face racism, xenophobia, discrimination, and even violence. And people can end up feeling alone and isolated because they've lost the support networks that most of us take for granted, or communities, colleagues, relatives, friends. And that's even in this scenario where they have been able to actually maybe claim that asylum and start rebuilding. It's not easy for any of them. And numbers wise, we're talking about the best part of 30 million people. There are about 30 million people who are classified by the UN bodies as refugees around the world. The vast majority of those, 84%, are refugees hosted by developing countries, quite often the very neighbouring countries to the ones from which they have fled. And so when we see the headlines on the front pages and the Home Secretary's speeches about people crossing the Channel, we're talking about an infinitesimally small proportion of the number of refugees globally if we're thinking about sharing responsibility, in a sort of equitable way. And I think that sometimes, when you quote numbers like 30 million people, that many people then can feel overwhelmed by the numbers, and then get to see people moving across borders as some sort of global crisis, because that's the word that's used, isn't it? Refugee crisis. As we would disagree that it's a crisis of numbers. People are not the problem here. The causes that drive families and individuals to cross borders, and the short-sighted and unrealistic ways politicians respond to them, that's the real problem, and that's the real crisis here. So I want to first of all sort of take a quick trip around the world for a snapshot of some of the lousiest political responses to people seeking to exercise their legal right of asylum. And I have to underline that it is all of our legal right to claim asylum should we find ourselves having to flee our home country because of war, persecution, and the like. So I flicked back just through the last few months of Amnesty reports dealing with flows of people seeking asylum. So could pick anywhere in the world. So I'm just going to pick out a few. So we documented recently how the US and Mexican governments have forcibly returned tens of thousands of unaccompanied children to the countries they fled in search of safety without any sort of adequate screening or consideration of the protection from harm they may need and may face upon returning. In particular, as you will have seen, there's been mass deportation of Haitian migrants at that border and horrific conduct, violent conduct against asylum seekers by US officials. Not that far away, a bit further south, we have seen the authorities of Trinidad and Tobago force asylum seekers back to Venezuela, often via sea, again, a very dangerous scenario. We've documented the summary return of Burundian refugees from Tanzania, and as a response to the pandemic, we've seen lots of countries, including Kenya, closing its borders, for instance, with Somalia and Tanzania, with no mechanism made available for asylum seekers and refugees who have been seeking to leave their home country and enter Kenya. Elsewhere, we've seen Bangladesh relocate thousands of Rohingya refugees to a remote silt island in the Bay of Bengal that has been classified as not fit for human habitation. And then coming to our own continent here in Europe, we continue to see unlawful forced return of refugees and migrants, including, for instance, from Greece to Turkey. And this is often accompanied by arbitrary detention, by violence, in some cases amounting to torture. And these practices are not the acts of sort of rogue border officers or responses to exceptional events, but are part of a coordinated, entrenched, long established and brutal method of border control that Amnesty sadly has been documenting for years, and that we know is part of a wider EU pushback against refugees, because we've seen the prevalence of similar pushbacks and other abuses of refugees and migrants at borders at other European countries at their borders. Croatia, Cyprus, France, Hungary, Italy, Malta, Slovenia, Spain. We've seen it right across Europe, and it isn't sadly getting any better. In the UK, don't need to tell you, the government's rhetoric and their actions, personified by Priti Patel, but not exclusive to her by any means, are increasingly hostile to refugees amidst the headlines about sort of record numbers of people crossing the Channel by boat. And again, I've already tried to put in context, those scenes and those numbers. And of course, meanwhile, why we've come together today, what we've been seeing in Afghanistan with the Taliban takeover, generating a human rights crisis in the country, and therefore inevitably an exodus of people fleeing persecution. And we've been documenting, the crackdown on people and crackdown on their human rights in recent months and long before, because this is a long-standing problem. It didn't start in August of this year, but it certainly has worsened in the last number of months. And since the Taliban assumed control throughout the country, they have clearly demonstrated that they're not serious about protecting or respecting human rights. And contrary to the Taliban's repeated claims that they will respect the rights of Afghans, we have found a litany of human rights abuses, including targeted killings of civilians and surrendered soldiers, blockading of humanitarian supplies. We've also seen restrictions being reimposed on women and girls, including right to education. We just have a new report out about that today. Also freedom of expression, including attacks on journalists, attacks on civil society and on human rights defenders. And the threat that these individuals and major sections of the population face is very real. And many, we know, because we're in touch with them, have been forced into hiding and live under constant threat of arrest, torture, and killing. Again, numbers, and this didn't start 2 months ago. It's been a decades-long problem. So the UNHCR, the official UN body on refugees, they say that there are nearly 6 million Afghans have been driven from their homes, 6 million from their homes and their country by conflict, by violence and persecution. About half of that 6 million, about 3 million, are internally displaced, people forced to flee their homes, but still inside the borders of Afghanistan. And about another 3 million have fled the country altogether. Over 2 million of them are in neighbouring countries. About 90% of those in the neighbouring countries have been hosted by Iran and Pakistan, and others have fled further afield. And the latest surge of violence, just looking at this year, we're talking about another 600,000 people, according to the UNHCR, who have had to flee. So what's the situation facing those individuals? So the people who've been able to get out, to get across the border, are now by and large stranded in military camps or in sort of ramshackle conditions in many neighbouring countries. they don't know their final destination, nor where they're going to end up, nor how they'll be able to rebuild their lives. And it was in the wake of the Taliban takeover in August, the Northern Ireland executive said that they were going to agree to resettle refugees under the UK government's newly announced Afghan relocations and assistance policy and the Afghan citizens resettlement scheme, something akin to the Syrian resettlement scheme that we saw a few years ago. And that Northern Ireland has been a significant part of that. And the executive has said that work is ongoing to determine the number of citizens to be resettled here. And they say that they're starting to make preparations to support the arrival of Afghan citizens. The UK government as a whole has said the figure will be around 20,000 people to be resettled under the scheme. But it should be noted that several months on from that announcement, the scheme still hasn't opened, even though we know that people are in dire need of urgent assistance. So then let's take a look at the story for Afghan refugees who perhaps make their own way to the UK, not via this official resettlement scheme that doesn't yet exist. And really, we have to say that a very different prospect is likely to await them, given the latest figures, what we've seen. The latest statistics from the Home Office show that they've actually turned down a majority of recent asylum applications from Afghans over the last year. So figures published in August showed that over half of asylum claims by Afghans in the year to the end, June 21, were rejected, with some of the refusals even being issued just at the very point where Taliban was taking complete control of Afghanistan. The data that the Home Office published also shows a backlog of more than 50,000 asylum cases, so still waiting to be processed, 50,000 people in limbo. And that problem is worsening. So 4 years ago, the figure was 20,000 claims awaiting to be processed and decided. Now we're looking at 50,000, and that's down to, say, the ineptitude or a particular policy decision by the Home Office to leave people in that sort of limbo. And there's a huge number of people who have now been left waiting for more than a year, in some cases more than several years, for a decision. And in terms of the resettlement scheme, the official proactive part of government policy, during that 1 year period, just 661 refugees were resettled to the UK in that year, 4/5 of whom were Syrian. So resettlement can be and is a welcome part of the solution necessary, but it's too little, and as we're seeing now, often too late. And we need to see it in that context. And in parallel, what's happening with the announcement of this scheme, we see the Nationality and Borders Bill that's currently in Parliament, and it's set to make things much worse. And things are already terrible, but things are going to get much worse. And the bill would actually unilaterally redefine the meaning, as according to the UK government's interpretation of it, of the 1951 UN Refugee Convention, which is the legal underpinning of the whole international asylum system. And it will almost certainly result in the refusal of asylum to even more refugees who should be entitled to stay because of the persecution from which they fled. So far from fixing the asylum system, this Nationality and Borders Bill is going to make things much, much worse. Let's think of those people crossing the channel that sort of appear in the headlines and they're, in the boats. We have to remember that people cross the channel, put themselves in that serious danger and their family members in that danger because there simply are no or insufficient safe alternatives open to them, and are forced into the hands of people smugglers. And now, what the government's doing is sort of criminalizing these people for trying to reach a place of safety, and that's frankly just legally, morally indefensible. But that's the path we're on, to go even more down that road. And what the UK is already doing and is looking to do more of is instead of taking its international responsibilities over refugee rights seriously, it's simply looking to pass the buck. And they've talked about offshore processing and doing deals with France and elsewhere. And that's totally a wrong-headed and immoral approach to the problem, and a flouting of its international commitments under the Refugee Convention. So that's where we are. Where should we be instead? So what we're clearly saying is that current UK asylum policy is ineffective, it's inhumane, it puts vulnerable people at risk, and is set to get worse if it still goes through in its current form. What we want to see instead from the government is that they accelerate and improve decision making, ensure that all those in need of protection receive it. Provide asylum seekers who would otherwise be destitute with sufficient support so they can meet their essential living needs until they're given permission to stay in the UK. Provide free access to healthcare to asylum seekers while they're in the UK. And to grant asylum seekers permission to work. We've set down if their case has not been resolved within 6 months, so that they actually have a chance to support themselves, their families, and have some human dignity that we would all like for ourselves and our families. So sorry that was a bit of a downbeat assessment of where we are, and try to set Afghanistan in the wider global context and bring it back to where we are in the UK in terms of the Home Office, because it's a central reserved power decision making at the Home Office, but also a glimpse of what the Northern Ireland Executive might do. And I should I'll reflect briefly, but I'll briefly, because I'm sure others can say more about this. In terms of the Syrian resettlement scheme, I think we've been delighted that Northern Ireland has been part of it, and the Executive did step up under pressure from activists some years ago when people were fleeing Syria in such massive numbers. And it has been good. Northern Ireland has actually, borne a disproportionate sort of number, or taken a disproportionate number of the overall UK number. I think that's good. And part of our message is the UK should be taking a lot more, and Northern Ireland can happily take more. But we also know that hasn't been plain sailing, and that some of the people resettled here who've largely been people with particularly serious sort of medical and trauma counselling type needs, families, that they've suffered lots of problems as well here, and the system hasn't been running as well as it should do in terms of language support, access to medical care, humane housing, and the rest of it. So we can and should do better, not just for the Syrians, but for Afghans who are going to come here, hopefully without too much more delay, but also be taking a similarly good approach to others fleeing elsewhere, because while Afghanistan is in the headlines, it's not the only place, and I've touched on a few of the other countries, not the only place in which people come. And appreciate NIPSA and the wider trade union movements, really strong support on this issue over the years, and there's more that can be done, and I think that part of it is about engaging with government and with the NGOs here who are working on delivery to make sure that the Executive delivers, and delivers better than we've done before. So thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Patrick, for that comprehensive yet concise contribution there. It is a lot to cover in a very short space of time, and we're really grateful for you coming today and speaking to us. And as you mentioned, human rights, equality, and global solidarity really are all cornerstones of the trade union movement, and ones which NIPSA and NIPSA Youth take very, very seriously. So in terms of lobbying and political efforts, we will continue and do our best to support those, as well as just the general awareness raising that sadly has to be a very important thing, given, as Patrick alluded to, the media propagandizing that goes on about these issues in a very negative way, more than not, unfortunately. So coming on to our next speaker is Israel Ekwereme from City of Sanctuary, Belfast. Israel is Nigerian by birth and migrated to Germany as a young unaccompanied asylum seeker, where he lived in Germany until 2007, when he then migrated to Northern Ireland. Israel is the present chairperson of Belfast City of Sanctuary. He was the chairperson of the Nigerian community, Northern Ireland, from 2017 to 2019. Israel founded Diverse Youth NI, which is a youth-led charity organization for children and young people, predominantly from the BAME communities and diverse backgrounds. Israel also founded I Assist NI, which is a befriending organization providing befriending support to young people, individuals and families from the newcomer and asylum seeker community, immigrants and migrants with little or no social network in Belfast, which has been alluded to as well as individuals suffering isolation due to age, illness and disabilities. So Israel, you're incredibly welcome. Thank you very much for coming to speak to us today. Over to you. Oh, just unmute there.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you, Geraldine, for chasing us all up with your emails. It's very nice, thank you. And I'm going to share my screen here, if that's possible. All right, I'll do it this way. Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Israel Ekwereme, and it's pronounced Ekwereme. Thank you, Adam, for trying. That's our first try. Most people never get it, even at the 10th try. So we're getting there someday. I'm going to talk about soft support available. First of all, let me take you guys back to what we do. Belfast City of Sanctuary, maybe some of you don't know much about Belfast City of Sanctuary. Belfast City of Sanctuary is part of a national organization and affiliated with Cities of Sanctuary in England and Scotland. We work in collaboration with Places of Sanctuary in Ireland. Our aim is very, very short. The aim is to create a welcoming, safe, and inclusive environment for asylum seekers and refugees fleeing from oppression and persecution in their home countries. And what we do, we don't do much, but we do much. So part of what we do is the Schools of Sanctuary. We do this in collaboration with the Education Authority and the urban villages and the Executive Office, of course, who funds it. We started with just one School of Sanctuary a couple of years ago, but today we have 50 Schools of Sanctuary, one College of Sanctuary, and then we hope to have the Queen's University and UU to become Universities of Sanctuary. One thing that's amazing about the Schools of Sanctuary is when you go into the schools, you find these young people who are from Syria, who are from Somalia, Sudan, who have integrated well into the school system, and they become support to other newcomers arriving. That's very interesting. Not only them being ambassadors, but the young people or children from the host communities also learning beside them and also becoming welcoming ambassadors, welcoming other young people to their schools. That's amazing. The Refugee Week Picnic, this is our yearly highlight, and I always look forward to it. Patrick, thank you very much, because Amnesty International partner with us in this, or we partner with them to deliver this. When I first joined the City of Sanctuary 2017, I had my first picture with you, Patrick. It was nice, and we had a couple of people attending, but 2019, we had the highest number ever, close to 1,000 people attended. So that means it's growing. And it's just to celebrate the richness and diversity, and culture that most asylum seekers bring to Northern Ireland. And the highlight of the 2019 was the Syrian community dancing. It was amazing. The dance steps, the music, and the food. We also have or run information sessions. We partner with relevant or collaborate with relevant organizations to raise awareness in matters pertaining to housing, education, policing, and other available services that are accessible to asylum seekers and refugees. We also delivered the Understanding Northern Ireland and How It Works training. This is delivered by Paul Nolan, who is one of our committee member. And also, we run other activities that connects communities, such as our, such as our coffee morning. Now we talk about available services. I arrived in Northern Ireland in 2007. I wasn't aware of what was available. I wasn't an asylum seeker. I was just a migrant from Germany. I didn't know what was available or accessible at all until I met someone who explained this to me through Axony, you know, and like, this is where you go for help. We always need somebody. When you arrive at a place, initially you are confused, you don't know where anything is, but you need someone to guide you. They always need someone to explain things to you. My English wasn't that bad when I arrived because I speak fluent German, but still I needed someone to explain to me in the language that I best understand. However, there was no interpreter, but I met other Nigerians here who explain things to me in broken English, which is a general language that we speak in Nigeria. So you can imagine how difficult it is for someone who never spoke English before, someone who doesn't know if there's any network support for him or her, someone from Syria just turning up here and the only language you understand is Arabic and nobody understands them. How can they access those services? How will they even know about the services? So it's a dilemma. One of the major ones that comes to mind here is education. The ESOL classes is delivered for free, you know, and they can access that through the Belfast Met, but BOC also delivers it. So always first refer people to BOC, Belfast Unemployed Resource Center. They run the ESOL classes. Further education, some courses are not free for asylum seekers. So they could study up to, I think it's access to the university or something like that, but they cannot access higher education. It's not available. So they have to rely on scholarships. And I think the Ulster University gives only 4 scholarships, while Queen's gives only 2. So just imagine about 200 asylum seekers wanted to go to university and they can't. It's not as if they are not well educated or they do not have the capacity to do that, but it's just because it's not available to them. But refugees can, but asylum seekers, they cannot. So going forward, available services, some of the services like housing, they have to depend on me as landlord, and Tiwa, you will keep me right if I'm wrong here, because I wasn't an asylum seeker, so I don't know how it works. I only hear from people. Yes. So yeah, so it's MERS, controlled by MERS. Welfare is £37 a week for an asylum seeker. But refugees, they can work. Those who have obtained the refugee status, they can then look for employment, have their access NI, and then look for employment. The health, GP, and counseling, these are all free to them. And they can also source legal aid for solicitors and other legal charges as asylum seekers. They have unrestricted access to the same service if they are eligible, that is now the refugees. Once they have gone through the process of asylum seeker, in Germany it's quite different. When I was an asylum seeker in Germany, I could work. So asylum seekers in Germany could work and make any living, but you can only work up to 16 hours a week. That was very helpful. We were independent on the government. So we were independent, they were paying us £20 a week. We were independent on that 20 euros, sorry. We were independent on 20 euros a week because we could work and we could build on our capacity, learn new skills. And if you want to go to university, you have to wait to become a refugee afterwards. So it's still the same process here. So that brings us to the right to work. Asylum seekers' right to work cannot be emphasized. We have highly skilled people who are asylum seekers. I've met a guy here, he's an asylum seeker, he has double masters where he comes from. So he has a master's in applied mathematics and he has masters in physics, but he cannot work. Every day he just goes out and walks and roams the street, but these are skills that are wasting, you know? So we have hard-working asylum seekers who wish to earn a living for themselves and their families, but they cannot work. So they have to depend on the £37 a week. And I was analyzing that yesterday because me and my family were going to buy pizza, and when we checked the cost, it was about £39. And I just reflected, that's what someone supposed to live on for a week. So we also have professional development, asylum seekers who wishes to study and expand their expertise, just like the man I mentioned, but they cannot. Why? Because the law restricts them. And if they eventually become able to work, I believe that the right of work should be pursued. Because if they eventually have the right to work, they will become economic contributors. They will pay their taxes, they will purchase more. However, there are certain things that don't work well, even for refugees. And I'm going to digress a little bit from refugees and even immigrants, because whenever I walk on the street, people don't know if I'm an asylum seeker or I'm an immigrant or I'm even a British. All they see is a black person. All they know is he's a black person before they start asking questions. Where I first worked, I was highly discriminated against at work, to be honest. But who am I going to seek help from? What do I know? Where's the information? Until somebody told me I should register with one of the workers' union, and which was Unison, because the managers will treat you differently. Everybody treated me differently, but I couldn't complain because I was afraid I would be sacked or nobody's going to listen to me. But then Unison actually took up one of my cases and they really supported me. So there's need for members of the BME committees to be supported in their workplaces when they experience discrimination and abuse in their places of work. And I think NIPSA is doing a very good job in the health sector, because I know some people are registered with them. So there's a need for BME workers to be educated of their rights as employees and where to seek help and support as victims of hate crime or incidents. And Belfast City of Sanctuary, we have run 2 workshops on this. During the pandemic, we had 2 online Zoom workshops, and before the pandemic, we also have a face-to-face workshop where we invited representatives from different workers' unions to talk about rights to work, or your rights in your workplace, not right to work, your employee rights in their workplaces. So I think that is very, very much needed for them to know their rights. If they're discriminated against or they face any sort of discrimination or racism at work, who to call and where to get help from. Finally, I think is how do we continue to help newcomers? Because the asylum seekers, refugees, and immigrants, they're all newcomers in Northern Ireland. Things are new to all of us. We don't know exactly what is accessible and what is not until you have lived here for a couple of years. Even if you lived here 10 years, there are some things you're still not sure of. So I believe in collaboration, that organizations should continue to work in collaboration to share information and resources, assessing needs of communities, engaging with communities, because if you don't engage with these communities, you never find out what their needs are. The Syrian communities, when they start arriving here, I think it is important for us to support them. But how do you support them if you don't engage with them? And we talked about the Afghanistan community that will soon be arriving, living with us in the community. If they arrive, how do we support them if we don't assess what their needs are? So yes, they will get access to housing, medical support and others, but there are other needs that we might not know of. Maybe their children are disabled. Maybe the children have autism or some kind of hidden disabilities. How do we know? How do we know how to support their needs, cultural needs, religious needs? So it's by engaging those communities and also supporting people through signposting them to relevant organizations for further support. And that's basically it. Mine is very short. Sorry if it's not elaborate enough, Patrick, but mine is very, very short. And I think that further collaboration with organizations, we can actually help and continue to help newcomer communities here. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel, for a very interesting presentation. And for everyone here, we can certainly, if you want to learn more about Cities of Sanctuary and how you can support them, I really encourage you to follow them on social media. I think they have a Facebook page, but also we can circulate after this meeting. I'm sure we can circulate their contact details if you wanted to learn more or you wanted to contact them, or if maybe we could circulate, Israel, that presentation even for people if they want to have a read of it. I know it's got your contact details on it.
Thanks.
And thanks for keeping me right on the pronunciation as well. I definitely struggled a bit there on that. Forgive me if I struggle going forward to keep me right. So our third speaker today is Tiwa Olatunbosun. Did I get that? Was that close?
Yes, that was close.
There we go. Tiwa is an asylum seeker, and she will be speaking to us today about her own experiences. And Tiwa's in a position to give us an insight about how accessible those services are for someone who has had to go through that asylum process. So Tiwa, please, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Yes, like you rightly called my name, he tried. My name is Tiwa Olatunbosun. I've been on asylum. I got into Northern Ireland in December 2019. So I'm not yet 2 years here, but I came here with my kids. And so it's been an up and down movement, so you win some, you lose some, you get access to some things and you don't get access to some things you have to really be on a queue before you're able to access those things. I didn't have a problem with putting my children in school. In fact, the school that I put them in, the principals were very accommodating, they were quite friendly, and my kids settled into school properly. But I, as a parent, because I came in the peak of lockdown, it was like I left my home country and I just came, boom, and the country was in a lockdown. So it was a bit challenging for me, but I was able to get some support from different organizations when I came here. I was able to get some advice from different organizations like Diverse Youth NI, Women's Aid, Storehouse. Those people have actually been amazing with my journey so far, and it's really been able to put food on the table for my kids, because living on £35 a day, living on £5 a day, that's like £37 a week for each child. That's supposed to just be for your meals. And I have growing kids. They need to put on clothes, they need to eat, they need to buy shoes, and they're growing like, I'm sure if you see, for those who Israel has seen my kids and they can testify that they don't even look like my kids because they've grown, they are way taller than I am. So it's not like, so I need to actually, from that, I actually need to save a little to be able to meet up with majority of their needs, especially with clothes and food. But like I said, the likes of Diverse Youth NI, Storehouse, Women's Aid, they come to my aid because they always give us food packs where I'm able to provide hot meals for my kids, like on a daily basis and all that. And you can imagine the challenges I faced with children eating every time because they were in a pandemic, being in one space, all they think of is just food. And you just need to make sure those food are available. I couldn't start explaining to them this and that. So, and I came from a place where I was a preschool teacher for 10 years. I believe that my talent is actually wasting away. I feel my talent is actually wasting away. And I mean, if I'm given the opportunity to work, I know I'm going to be an economic benefit to the nation. You know, I have skills. I know how to braid hair. I can make people's hair. You know, I have different things that I'm ready to bring to the table as long as I'm able to work. So that's my story so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, especially for those speakers today who are speaking from personal experience and their stories and talking about their journeys. It's very personal, and it's not always easy to do that. So thank you very much. Tiwa, our next speaker, penultimate speaker before we get to the Q&A section today is Damien Ekwereme. Damien is also an asylum seeker, and part of Damien's story is that he was refused access to university due to his asylum seeker status, despite achieving good grades at A-level exams. So Damien's also going to speak a bit about their journey and their experience. Damien, sorry, over to you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Damien, as he said, and I'm 20 years old. I came here when I was about 12, I think. So I've been here for close to 9 years. And when the first time we arrived, I wasn't an asylum seeker. I came here like on a visa. But over the years, like I'm not currently I'm an asylum seeker right now. And over the years, I've obviously gone through the school process. I've gone from GCSEs to A levels, and I've done all that. And I actually wasn't aware of the difficulties I'll face when I came to university level. But when I got to because I actually gained admission into Queen's to study chemical engineering. So I was gonna do that, but the fees were because you have to pay as an asylum seeker, you have to pay the same fees as an international student, which is 20,000 a term, while also being and it's impossible to work at the same time because you're an asylum seeker. So you can see how like the situation was impossible, and I've deferred my admission for like a year to see if my situation improves. But the scary part is just not being able to know when your case is going to be reviewed, or like because you have no clue, so you're just living like in the dark basically. And it's obviously like it's been scary like, and I've been disheartened by it as well, because it's I mean it's not being able to progress at the same time as your friends and your peers and everyone else progressing. It's heartbreaking. But obviously through the support I've gained from, because I'm the chairperson of Diverse Youth at the moment. So through the support system we have, I've kind of come to terms with it, but I've accepted it's not the end of the road, and there's going to be more like chances and opportunities ahead for me. And it's just if I didn't have the support of it's just like I'm just thinking, because if I didn't have the support of the youth group and my parents, because some people actually go through this whole like asylum process alone without any support like from parents, because they're just all by themselves in a strange country and they know no one. So it's obviously like it's been hard for me. So I just feel it's terrible for like people who have no support, who have no means of getting support, and who are just all by themselves. But basically, like my story is I've not been able to work while also not going to uni at the same time. You're just stuck, you're idle, you have nothing to do for like 7 days a week. It's a tough realization, but I don't really have much to say. I just from my own point of view and what I can talk about is it's heartbreaking. But I've with the support of the youth group, and I have my hands, obviously as a chairperson, I still have my hands full with the youth group, so that should keep me busy for a while. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. To be honest, I don't have much to say.
Thank you very much. I mean, no, I think you have a lot to say, and Tiwa has a lot to say too. You know, I mean, we hear a lot about the global stats and statistics, the research and the reports, but I think until you put human faces to this. It can be very hard to get your head around, but like I feel very emotional just hearing our last two speakers, and I before I open it up to Q&A, I would just say as someone who works within the community sector, I once was invited to provide evidence at a hearing for an asylum seeker from Albania. And I found the court process and the Home Office to be incredibly hostile. I think that fear and not giving people full information is a weapon that the Home Office uses, quite frankly, in a very disingenuous way. So I'd just like to say that. So we're opening it up to questions and answers now. If people know how to raise your hands, or if you want to type it into the, if you want to put it into the chat. I see the president of the union just saying he has to dash on, but thanks so much, Brian, for coming today. So does anyone have any thoughts or questions or queries for any of our speakers or on the general topics? There's always this silent bit where no one wants to go first. So there we go. Paddy McWilliams. Thank you, Paddy, for being brave and being the first person to put your hand up.
Yeah, well, you usually need somebody to start, don't you, to get it going. I really enjoyed this. I found it very, very interesting and very informative. I always think that it's, I mean, I spent most of my 20s working away from home. And I'm coming from a country, Ireland, that we've exported our people all over the world for generations. And we have hopefully enriched some of the countries that we've gone to. And those who have come to work in our country and to live in our country have enriched us, enriched our lives. I remember at university managing diversity, and one of the things was you needed the framework there, obviously, of equal opportunities for everyone, but you also through managing diversity, where you're looking to see with people what skills they have and how you can develop those skills. And by giving them the assistance to do that, you can then add those, they bring more to the society. So it's a win-win, and we all benefit from it. But it is key to having people who can come forward and say, this is what I need. And then you look to see how you provide that. And it enriches all of us. That's the way I've always viewed. I've always enjoyed being in a diverse community, but not everybody feels that way, unfortunately. And we do have, and a question that I would have would be, what do we do in the situation where we have the likes of those protests in Carrickfergus a while ago? And I remember right at the time, I was absolutely disgusted. And I actually wrote, Brian's just left now, but I wrote to Brian at the time. I said, look, what can we do about this? We need to do something about this. How do we react to it? This is a question, because it's okay. I can have my view on how we should react to something like that. Do we face it down? Do we drive these people off the streets? But is that necessarily what people want us to do? And it's, how do we help in a situation like that? And if somebody maybe could, I would like to hear maybe a point of view on that, because it's very easy for me to say, I think we should do X, Y, and Z, but I'm not living in that situation. I don't have to live with the repercussions of it necessarily. I mean, my own answer to it is, if anyone says something I disagree with, I speak out at the time, because I don't think you can just leave that. You need to confront racism, because there's no other way of describing it. You need to confront that. But how can we help in that situation, in a situation like Carrickfergus? That's something I would like to throw out there, because we do need to find out what it is that people need from us, from the rest of society here. And that's something that taxes me as to how we actually deal with something like that.
Thanks, Paddy. So I'll open that up to our speakers, perhaps. The question about how do we tackle racism and xenophobia within our society. It is a growing problem and an active one. So I'll just open that up to the speakers, maybe, if anyone wants to go first, or Israel, go ahead.
Thank you, Adam. I think it's a learned behavior. Whatsoever is learned can be unlearned. That's what I believe. When I arrived in Germany, 1996, there was nobody, no Black person in the village that I was living as an asylum seeker. So you could imagine going to the shop that was how many miles away from that small village of Degenhofen, people chanting behind you, who, or somebody asking you, where did you keep your tail today? You know, provocative. You know, moving from Degenhofen to Nuremberg even made it worse. Was attacked twice by skinheads, beaten and left for almost dead. But today it's a very, very diverse community, and I think it's just because people have learned to accommodate people. And most of those people who thought probably my Blackness was dirt or I painted myself, because they would come and touch my skin, see if they can wipe off a piece of my skin. They've realized that it's a skin, it's my pigment. And media played a huge role in that, because every Saturday, the only thing they show on ZDF was very old black and white movie of Africa, the Bushman, the guys running with leaf covering the front and the back is open. So when you keep watching that as a child for over 15 years and you see the first Black person wearing trousers, you'll be like, what? Can they wear clothes? So you'll start questioning yourself, because you have been fed these negative stereotypes all your life. So it's re-educating people. And I'm very grateful that the curriculum in schools will change. When you are taught about slavery and not taught about the people who actually perpetuated it, you are taught one side of the story. When you are taught about the colonies of Britain and not talking about the horrible incidents that the colonizers did, then you are telling just one side of the story. That's why racism keeps flourishing, because people don't know the other side of the story. It's re-educating the community, it's engaging with the community, it's us telling our stories and the host community telling their stories, because I believe integration should never be one-sided. I want to be led into what's happening in that orange hall. I want to know what is there. I want to be able to go in there. I want to communicate. I want to learn. You know, but if people only keep hearing our story of racism, it's rife, it's there. But what about the story of people who want to hear about my story? What have you gone through? You know, why is North and West not in agreement? I don't know. Why can some people from East not go to the West or West not go to the East? I don't know. Those divisions are real. You know, so I believe in education. To be frank, I believe in education. I believe we're already doing what we can do best. Amnesty International, they're doing what it can do best. I mean, the arson attack was a horrible one, but I really appreciate the community, how everybody came together and raised the money just to tell the speakers F off. So it's a pocket of very minute people who are still illiterate, in my opinion. I don't want to give them that degree of exaltation to keep talking about what they do. Rather dwell on the good people who are doing great things in Northern Ireland. The people who are organizing talks like this. You never see that on BBC that NIPSA organized a talk about this and it was educative. No, but if someone throws an egg on my window and I call them, they will be here with their cameras just to show that negative thing. And people like negative stuff. They will keep doing it because it gives them the audience to be silly and stupid. The only racism that I am against is institutionalized racism. I hate it. And I don't think it's good enough for any society. And it's right here in Northern Ireland. So when the police believe that or will not prosecute people who are perpetrators of hate incidents, that is institutionalized, in my opinion. having incidents where the police turns the cases against people because there's a family whose daughter was water hosed by a neighbor, and they called the police, and the police said you instigated it because you should have told your children not to go to the fence of the neighbor. How can I instigate something like that? And then the neighbor water hosed the child, and this other family was never prosecuted. So there are a couple of these things, like even the health system. What about the legal system? The Black Lives Matter, everybody saw it. So I think we are doing what we can do best, but education should be the key. We'll keep educating people, keep engaging communities, keep talking about it so that people who are doing it can hear the impact it's having on the people that they are affecting and how it affects other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel. And just before I call on our next speaker there, all of us here from NIPSA come from a variety of institutions, be they public service or the civil service. And I think that all of us hopefully will go away from today thinking about what we can do in our own workplaces, whether it is trying to get managers to invite in City of Sanctuary, for example, or obtaining materials to put up on your workplace notice boards, and trying to raise education, as Israel says. So just going to call on Laura Totten there, please. Laura, go ahead.
Well, thanks very much. I think that's very good about, talk about education there. But certainly I'm from the Youth Justice Agency, but one of the things that we've noticed is that, young people get quite a bit of education about hate crime and, dealing with difference. What we find is the challenge is actually the older generation, so their parents or grandparents, and the messages that they're receiving from those generations. Young people are actually quite open to difference, but they're going home and hearing rhetoric in terms of, foreigners are stealing our jobs, etc., etc. So I do think there is something about educating the older generations within our communities, because that's who the young people listen to. And it's entrenched in that population, and that's a difficult population to touch. But it's back to the likes of, as you say, BBC News. It's about storming. You look at the funding that goes into the likes of dealing with dangerous driving, and there's ads on the TV, etc. That sort of money should be pumped into this to educate the general public around what asylum seekers, refugees, people from other cultures bring to Northern Ireland. And some of those stats around the fact that it's a very, very small percentage. That's my kind of tuppence worth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Patrick, did you want to come in? Sorry there, go ahead.
Yeah, and if there's nobody else looking to come in right yet, I'll maybe just engage with the points that have been made and the question that Paddy made to start with, and that Laura's reflected on as well. So if you think back to that those sort of far right protests outside the hotel in Carrickfergus that Paddy was talking about, I mean, the people involved in that were looking to exploit that situation and the people in given that temporary accommodation in the hotel for their own ends, to try and get publicity, inflame community tensions, and build their far-right movement off the backs of other people's sort of difficulties. And so I suppose when I think about how do you respond to that, I just think you have to act smart rather than, because I think probably a lot of us felt I want to go and do a counter protest, or get in their face and tell them get the hell out of town and all of that. But I sort of, when I take a step back, I think that's playing into their hands. That's giving them even more of the publicity, generating more of what they want, and helping them achieve their ends. And so you maybe reflect on trying to respond differently. And I think that I know what was going on behind the scenes there. A few things. One was showing quiet solidarity with the people in that hotel and the wider sort of refugee and asylum seeker community in Northern Ireland through various organisations. And so I know that some of the local community groups and church groups and the like were visiting the people in the hotel and saying we have your backs, solidarity, and trying to offer practical support as well. while also putting pressure on the police to do their job and to make sure that those people were safe and protected, and that there wasn't going to be any sort of incursion or attack on the individuals within the hotel. And I think beyond that, though, it's about how do you respond to this wider problem of racism within our society. And I think at times, protest has a place for that. And, I cast my mind back to 2014. It's a long time ago now, it seems, but like the Peter Robinson, when he was first minister, his comments about trusting a Muslim to go to the shops for him, and that was off the back of Pastor James McConnell's sort of sermon, sort of stirring up sort of community tensions. And I think one of the things that happened there was that trade union movement, NIPSA, the sort of the umbrella ethnic minority sort of civil society group at the time, Amnesty, others came together, and we did protest. We organised a very major demonstration in Belfast at the time, but with a political call. So we were using the response to Peter Robinson, the outrage people felt as one thing, some wacky pastor, and another thing when it's your first minister, but to direct that energy then towards a political call. At that time, the executive was resisting putting in place a racial equality strategy. It had lapsed for years. They were sitting on their hands, not doing anything. And that was the key call, is for them to do their job, because we know they're the ones with the resources, with all of the departments of government, can actually take action at all sorts of levels. And within, I think, a week or something of that demonstration happening, they said they were moving on it, and we did see a strategy. Now I reflect, sort of halfway through that strategy now, the government recently published an audit of how things were going, and they're not going at all well. There's progress on some fronts, but regression on others. And in terms of public attitudes, the public attitudes actually seem to be worsening. So we sort of think everybody's getting a bit more liberal and progressive and inclusive. Sadly, that's not the case. And that people seem to be holding more prejudiced attitudes, at least in some directions. So anyway, there's a job of work to be done there. I think a lot of the community groups from the ethnic minority sector have said, they feel like there's no real commitment from government departments and from the executive as a whole to delivering that strategy, and that they need to see much more action. So I think that when we're talking about what we can do in response, so you don't have to knee-jerk into dancing to somebody else's tune and maybe playing into their agenda around protest and counter-protest. Protest has their place, but figuring out the strategy of what do we actually want to achieve for long-term good here to change this society. We started off talking about sort of asylum seekers and what people can do and the stuff that the executive can deliver on that, but there's a wider issue as well that they're failing to deliver on, and also holding the police to account. So the police did do a good job in Carrickfergus, but in too many other incidents of racist hate crimes, they're not. And the conviction rate for race hate crime in this place is abysmal. It's awful. And I think that only emboldens those who will do the attacks on people's homes or on their community centres and the like, if people aren't being held to account. And so I think that's something that we can do as as activists and as organisations as well.
Thanks very much. I'll call on one last question or comment there from Paul Cabane, and then we'll sort of aim to wrap up by 6. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks very much, Adam. Following on from what Israel had said, I mean, it's not difficult to get the people in Northern Ireland not to appreciate what Britain has done throughout the years with regards to slavery, not just everywhere, but even here in this country. We know that in this country. I am not so sure how much is hatred and how much is fear with a lot of people, and I think what we need to do is dispel the myths. We're banned the propaganda that's being put out by the press, by the TV people, by the British government. And really, I mean, after the Carrick incident, I was actually talking to a couple of very close friends, and they said, why don't you just go out and get a job and pay the rent the same as me? And I had to say, because they're not allowed to work. And they said, we didn't know that. So a lot of people don't understand what the reality is for these people, that they're not allowed to work, they're not allowed to, to provide for themselves, their families, or whatever. And I think not only as a trade union movement, but as anyone who's interested. I think what we have to start doing is educating ourselves and dispel the myths, because that's where it comes from. And I mean, let's be honest, Northern Ireland, we know how to hate with a passion. We hate each other, and normally we leave everybody else alone. But the reality is, we're buying the lies, and I think we need to put the message out that says, here's the reality, here's the truth. The reason this person isn't going for a job is because they're not allowed to work, and that's not their fault, and it's not our fault. It's law, it's government that's doing it. So I think a good start is dispel the myths. Even if NIPSA want to do that and put it out, I'll certainly hand the flyers out around where I work, and let's dispel all this nonsense, because we're just being fed, rubbish, and we're accepting it. And we need to say it's not true. It's not true. And I really admire those the speakers today to come up and lay their story on the line. And if I had a £20,000, I'd pay for that guy's education, but I don't have it. But I think fair play to you, son. Stay in there and keep fighting them. And for any person with children on their own trying to provide for them, it's horrendous. And unfortunately, we just need to dispel the myths, put the pressure on our MLAs and the people that we do elect. We can't stop the Tories. You don't elect them, but we elect our MLAs. And it's time we started using more of a political voice. Thanks for the time, Adam.
100%. Thanks, Paul. And sure, after this, the NIPSA Youth Committee, whenever we next meet, will reflect on everything that's been said today and how we, as a committee, and how we as a union can follow up, whether it be looking at resources for reps or applying political pressure, etc. So just within the next, do any of our speakers who haven't spoken yet, do you want to have a final word, or are you happy enough? Oh, sorry, there's someone. Yvonne, is it a quick one? Just, yeah, go ahead. Just unmute, sorry.
Sorry, no, just very quickly wanted to say how enlightening this has been and to thank the speakers. I'm totally ashamed to say that I had no idea that asylum seekers only got £37 a week. I am just shocked to my core. I just can't believe it. I can't believe I didn't know it. So I'm ashamed. So thank you for this event, and I'll definitely try to help in any way I can. And I think, what Paul was saying there, just about the education piece around laying out the facts for people, because even that basic fact has just totally floored me. It's horrendous. So, but that Damien couldn't get an education, and he's been here since he's 12. I just can't get my head around that. I'm totally shocked. So thank you so much to the speakers.
So I'd echo that. Thank you very much to all of our speakers, and thank you to everyone who took time out of your day for coming here today. And as I say, we will look at how we can follow up on this. So with the last couple of minutes we have, I just want to maybe pass back to Geraldine Alexander from NIPSA, who did the legwork of making today happen, and just to say thanks again, everybody. So Geraldine, do you want to tie things off there?
Indeed, Adam, thank you so much. All I want to do in closing today's event is to thank all our contributors today, but especially want to thank Tiwa and Damien for taking the time to tell us about their experience and to acknowledge the courage that they have shown. And also to say, as a trade union, we will continue to hold our government to account and put pressure on them in terms of providing sufficient support to refugees and asylum seekers here in Northern Ireland, and to make sure that they accelerate and improve the decision-making process as put forward by Patrick, and also to grant asylum seekers permission to work while their case is under consideration, and to do that as early as possible and not wait long in ensuring that happens. So thank you all for your attendance here today, for your interest and your support. And as Adam says, as a youth committee, we will take on board all that has been discussed today. The educational element around that is extremely important for all our young NIPSA members and all of us actually in NIPSA, and we will look to see what else we can do from that perspective moving forward. So thank you again for your attendance and all the speakers. And Adam, thank you for chairing the session. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Take care now.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.